So, our study was on how tea blending affects the various sensory attributes of green tea. So, we're just going to start with a quick introduction to green tea itself. All true teas, so this does not include things like peppermint and fruit teas like flower blossom teas. All true teas, which are the black, oolong, green, dark, and white varieties, come from the plant Camellia sinensis. I don't know if I pronounced that right. But they basically, the only thing that separates them is the level to which the tea leaves are actually dried and oxidized before being packaged. So black tea is the most popular tea in the US, is heavily oxidized, which obviously has a drastic effect on its flavor. On the opposite end, white teas, which tend to be very smooth, very sweet, are not oxidized at all before being either bagged or sent to their loose leaf distributor. So the green teas are right there in the middle. They're mildly oxidized, lightly processed. So this makes them a little bit different than white teas, but they're much closer to a white tea than they are a black. Now, tea as a whole, across the globe, is the second most consumed beverage only behind water. It's very popular, especially in Japan and China, but it's definitely gaining popularity throughout the US. Green tea is the second most consumed tea behind black, and this is partially due to the fact that it's much more bitter than black tea. So there's quite a bit of popularity difference between the two, and this is often because the US tends to prefer sweeter things, and black tea is very easy to sweeten with milk and sugar. Green tea, on the other hand, can be sweetened with things like honey, but it's a little bit harder to do. So green tea, as far as sensory goes, has very strong vegetal notes: green bean, asparagus, spinach, fresh cut grass, especially as far as aromas go, and it tends to be a little bit more spicy and somewhat bitter, which definitely has an impact on how much it's consumed throughout the US. So taking that and moving into blending, blending is basically the art of mixing ingredients into your tea to make the vast variety of teas that are available on the market. So it starts off with basically selecting a base, and then all of the ingredients that are going to go off of this base are selected to complement and accentuate the flavors of that foundation. So there's never the plan to kind of overpower. You always select this, and you select all of your ingredients by trying them individually and brewing them. And this includes your things like rose petals and things like that. You're actually going to brew them on their own and then use that knowledge of how they all taste individually to figure out what is going to mix together best as a whole. From this point, you then select your tisanes, which are basically any ingredient that is in a tea leaf. So this can be things like flower petals, spices, roots, herbs, dried veggies, and dried fruits, which you'll see in one of ours later, and also things like sweeteners like stevia or sugar. This obviously is where the majority of the difference is made up between teas. And what's important when you kind of blend a tea is that you have to make it so that the ratio results in every teaspoon of that tea, which is generally about how much goes into a tea bag, has all of the ingredients in the proper ratio. And once you kind of have that ratio, you have that blend, now you have to decide as a company, how is it going to reach the customer? Is it going to show up as a tea bag or as a loose leaf? Is it going to be put into a strainer? And this is important because ultimately all teas would be brewed as loose leaf. However, in the US, we tend to be very busy, we're always rushing around, and tea bags tend to be the most popular because they're convenient. But ideally, in order to get the maximum amount of oxygen into that brew and to allow it to truly expand in the way that it needs to, you would prefer that all teas were just loose at the bottom of the teapot and the straining happened at the very end when you poured it into your glass. So with that kind of background, we're going to move more into the test now. So when we started out, we kind of talked about what would be most important, and we found that we really had the most data and the most understanding, and the items that had the most effect on enjoyment of tea happened to be their aroma and their flavor. So these were what our hypotheses were built off of. So our null hypothesis was just that blending was going to have no effect on green tea aroma. The alternative was obviously the opposite of that, that it's going to have a significant effect on it. And in a similar vein, our second hypothesis was pretty much the same idea, but with tea flavor as opposed to aroma. So with that in mind, we did kind of want to add that even though we didn't build hypotheses around color and mouthfeel, we did analyze them because they obviously are important. The way you view a tea, the first thing you see oftentimes is its color, and the way that it affects and feels in your mouth is also very important to enjoyment and analysis of tea. So they are included in our statistics, however, they aren't the focus. So on to kind of materials and methods. Our team of 4, we had 3 women, 1 man. We actually had a 19, 20, 21, and 22-year-old. Only one of our panelists identified as consuming tea multiple times a day. Other 2 were a couple times a week, and another panelist rarely, if ever, had tea. And obviously this is going to impact the way that they analyze the tea. Somebody that consumes it multiple times a day comes in with a lot of opinions as to how tea should taste, and they also have a lot of ideas as far as the different attributes that can be in tea, as opposed to the opposite, where if you don't have it very often, everything kind of tastes the same. So we had to keep this in mind when we went into training. So now a quick analysis of our teas themselves. Our first sample was a very sweet, very creamy kind of tea. As you can see here, there's a lot of very sweet ingredients that were added, a lot of licorice, orange peel, and we've got some sweeteners like stevia. This is going to have a lot of effect on the flavors that you perceive. It's purchased Winco Foods, very easy to get a hold of, and it's a tea bag. It's definitely a convenience tea, tastes really good. It's very popular for people that are just starting out with green tea. Kind of a little bit step to a different direction, we had a white tea blended with a green tea, which we wanted to try because white is very smooth, very sweet. It's going to be interesting to see how those two interacted as a base. Similar to the other one, there's a lot of lemon, a lot of citrus flavors that were added into this one, which helps make it a little bit more palatable to people that are transitioning into the whole green tea drinking phase. It's a Walmart buy. It's very easy to find, just like the other one, and it's also a tea bag. Now, in a kind of totally different direction, we had Red Ridge Farms number 3, which is a tea blend that was made specifically for a small farm in Dayton, Oregon. It's supposed to be kind of an easy wake-up, very mild but pleasant green tea for kind of the morning. It's a loose leaf tea, which impacts a little bit how you brew it. And then our last one is the most basic green tea you can get, which is just whole green tea leaves. It was purchased at the co-op in bulk and loose leaf, and it's kind of acted as a way of a base reference to what green tea is in its most natural state. Now to prep, we chose 2 grams simply because this is typically what you find in a tea bag, which made preparations a little bit easier. 165 degrees, this is what we brewed it at. It's a very standard temperature for brewing tea. Some wanted a little bit higher, but we felt that this was the easiest and to standardize across all the teapots we were using. 5 minutes, that's just a really good go-to amount for brewing tea. Once our tea was brewed and finished, we added a 1/4 cup of each kind of tea to 6-ounce styrofoam cups. Everybody got one. And then we pretty much set a limit that you had to consume within 5 minutes, just to ensure that there wasn't too much temperature difference that might change how you perceive the flavors and the colors of the tea itself. This is our tea wheel. Firepot Nomadic Teas is a very, very dependable brand, and their tea wheel happened to be the easiest to read, and it included all of the same attributes you would find on, say, the Tea Masters Association. So this is a very standard tea wheel. It's not necessarily specific to green tea, it's just kind of across all teas. Now our first round of analysis was just basically a training round. It was to get everybody accustomed to the teas, to get everybody accustomed to the different kinds of flavors you could have in tea. After everybody had kind of done an analysis themselves, come up with a list of attributes, we sat down and decided which ones we were actually going to focus on for the second and true round of the tea tasting. As you can tell, we had 11 attributes. We had quite a few that we were focusing on. We all made the standards together, tasted them, analyzed them to make sure that we felt they were a good base to go off of, and then created a standards chart and went off of this for our final evaluation, which basically had us analyzing them along a 15-centimeter line scale. Every sample was analyzed twice just to get us enough data, and after everything was done, it had taken us about 3 hours to do this. We did have a 30-minute break in the middle in order to prevent panelist fatigue and to kind of give us a chance to regroup and make sure we were going in the right direction. So it was definitely a long day, but it was fun. And then at the end, we had all of our data. So as you can see here, there were significant differences as far as flavor and aroma goes in brown sugar between panelists. So that was the only difference we really had between panelists. And then in our samples, we had differences between our fresh cut grass aroma, our vanilla aroma, and our brown sugar flavor. There weren't as many differences as you can see between the other flavors that were left over. And this is all done at a 0.05 significance. When we get to color and mouthfeel, we have quite a bit of difference, which you could have easily seen if you had looked at these samples. It definitely brewed into different color categories. Once again, our panelists only really varied on mouthfeel, which kind of makes sense when you think about the amount of times we tasted it, especially, and the different levels of experience we had with tea. As far as colors and aromas go with Fisher's LSD, we had pretty much with every attribute tested, we had significant differences between at least one sample. We definitely didn't have one where there was consistency around them. As you can imagine, things like the fresh cut grass aroma, our Republic of Teas, that just basic loose leaf green tea, had a lot of difference just because there's nothing added in to kind of take away from that flavor. As far as our main flavors go, for flavor and mouthfeel, sorry I said that way, we didn't have a lot of differences between the spicy and the citrus flavor, which makes sense when you look at green tea itself. As we had spoke about at the very beginning, spicy is kind of how green tea tends to be in its most natural state. The citrus was a little bit surprising because that's not something you typically kind of attribute to green tea as a base. However, most of the blended teas did have a citrus aspect brought in. And my favorite, the vibe plot. I love this just because it allows you to kind of take a look at which attributes sort of define each tea, which we will show you here. So Good Earth, very typical for this brand and for this type of tea, all kind of sweet, creamy, smooth attributes going along with it. And that's definitely the point of this tea when you look at it and you look at the brand. Our Celestial, as we saw in the packaging, definitely citrus focus on it, and it was a very dark tea when it had been done brewing. Blend number 3, this one was interesting because it had the lowest kind of association with any of the attributes we had. So on most of the scales, it ended up being very low in everything except for the way that it brewed color-wise. So that was kind of reflected here when you see, yes, it was defined by floral and spicy, but only slightly. And then, as you would expect, the People's Republic of Tea definitely focused a lot on the fresh cut grass and the yellow color, which if you just leave green tea in its basic state, this is basically what it's supposed to be, so that definitely makes sense. So in both of our cases, we rejected the null hypothesis, which was definitely kind of expected going in if you know about tea. Blending has an immense effect on how your tea turns out. The one thing that we did find a little bit surprising was the fact that blending didn't have as much effect on flavor as we expected. It definitely did create a difference, but it didn't have the range of difference we thought that it would. This is something that I definitely think needs to be researched further in the industry, just because, you know, every added ingredient is an added cost. So if you can avoid adding extra when you don't need to, then that could really help the tea industry as a whole be more economical. These are our references. There is a lot of data out there. There wasn't a lot of data into tea blending and how it affected flavor and sensory attributes. So that was one thing I thought was very interesting. I definitely think needs to be looked into more. There was a lot of interest in how blending could affect preservation methods and packaging. Not a lot as far as how it affected actual flavors. So I think that's something that the industry could look into more, especially on a scientific basis.